We'll get started. My name is Dan Finley. I'm Vice President of Corporate Services for the Pacific Western Group of Companies, and very excited to be with you today and have this fine group of panelists here. This is session number 2 of 3 as we walk through the Edmonton On-Demand program. If you didn't get to see session 1, there was a link to session 1 in the invite for session 2. And it's also posted online at Pacific Western's website, which is pwt.ca. So that's if you didn't get to see session 1. Session 1 discussed kind of the approach, the thought behind what Edmonton was trying to do with a bus network redesign and some of the solutions that were generated for that. We are going to kind of be talking about once the decision has been made and things were put together, we're going to be talking about service design. We're going to be talking about all the things that happened over the past several months and well, actually a year, just because of COVID. This service was actually supposed to launch in September, but was delayed due to COVID. So it's been quite some time. We're going to talk about the ups and downs and ins and outs from the service provider, PWT, as well as the technology provider, and then Edmonton's views on this as well. So without further ado, we're going to get it kicked off. We have the 4 folks here on the screen. So if you are viewing with gallery view, you may want to switch to presenter view, so that you can get the best experience. And we're going to start with Hamish Campbell. Hamish, I'm going to let you take it away. Hamish is from VIA, who is the technology supplier for the Edmonton On-Demand program. And very excited to have you with us today. Hamish, take it away.
Thanks, Dan. Welcome, everyone. So as Dan mentioned, I'm the country manager for Canada at VIA. I'm based in Ontario. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to start, and then Sarah and James will present today as well. So this is my piece only, but what I'm going to start with is just give a very quick overview of VIA and who we are as a company. I'm going to show what on-demand actually looks like for riders. You know, in my experience, not everybody's sort of seen and felt what the on-demand rider experience looks like. So quickly go through that. And then I'll talk about a typical on-demand service design process. And if you come from sort of the fixed route transit world, you know, I was a transit planner years ago. You know, it's similar principles, but a little bit of a different process. So I'm going to talk about it a bit at sort of a conceptual and philosophical level, but try and relate it to sort of what Edmonton did and sort of how we think about on-demand service design. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things we've seen as a result of COVID and some of the trends that we're seeing from around the world, and then talk about, you know, things that we think about after launching the service. So it's not, you know, it's not like you are one and done, you launch your service and move on. There's very much a continuous improvement and refinement process after launch. So just very briefly, you know, this isn't to sort of impress with numbers. This is more about the fact that, you know, on-demand is being adopted around the world. You know, VIA, we are now in over 24 countries. So it's very much, you know, there's a lot of expertise and know-how in this space now, you know, between us and PWT and elsewhere. So you know, there's a lot of thought and background at this point as it relates to on-demand. And what does it actually look like for riders? So this is the actual Edmonton On-Demand app. And when a rider downloads the app from the App Store or the Google Play Store, you know, they launch the app, they register by providing their first name, last name, email, and phone number. So very limited information is required. And what they see when the app actually launches is this. And what this is you can see grayed out are the areas where fixed route service operates, and in between are the on-demand zones. And I think in the first webinar we touched on this a little bit, but it's essentially in Edmonton, as part of the network redesign, there were gaps left in the fixed route network as a result of pushing services or streamlining services onto main routes, and those gaps were filled with on-demand services. So what you can see there on the map is the various gaps, and that's what a rider sees. So they know if they live in one of those communities or neighborhoods that they can request a ride. So what you can see there is dropping yourself in the Rio Terrace neighborhood, and it actually gives them the option to select West Edmonton Mall because that's their connecting terminal location. So what they see there is in 5 minutes, there's a ride that can pick them up and connect them with the West Edmonton Mall to then connect in with the rest of the network and fixed route services. Once the customer has booked a ride, they can see where they need to pick up that ride. In the case of Edmonton, it's at physical bus stops within the community, and then they can track that ride, and it tells them exactly where the vehicle is, how long it'll be to the pickup, and they receive SMS or text messages as they're waiting for the vehicle. So it's a very, very high touch experience for the rider. And in our experience, riders really, really like these services because they look and feel like ride sharing services, but with all the efficiency benefits of public transit as well. So now I'm going to go to what a typical service design process looks like. And there are kind of three components to this. The first step when thinking about on-demand service design is to really establish your goals, and we'll touch on that in a sec. And then figure out the parameters, so the details of the on-demand service, and then simulate or estimate what a service would look like for riders. And I'll walk through those steps in much more detail now. But the most important thing to start with is to figure out your goals. So, in the case of Edmonton, as a result of the network redesign, there were communities that were going to potentially have a different level of service as a result of the network redesign. There were some new communities on the periphery that had not previously had transit service and maybe didn't warrant fixed route network service. So the goal in Edmonton was to fill some of those gaps and improve coverage across the overall network through on-demand. Other communities, it may be different. So there may be an opportunity to commingle with specialized transit. Smaller communities or medium-sized cities, during evenings and weekends, they have underperforming fixed route services. Sometimes communities want to try out new vehicles, so EVs or even autonomous vehicles, and this is a way to do that. There's no right or wrong goal, but it's important to know sort of why you're doing this and what you want to accomplish by the switch to on-demand. And then once you've done that, this is a bit technical, but I think it's not complicated if you come from the fixed route world. In fixed route, you've got a supply of vehicles that you're putting out on the network. You've got demand in the form of ridership, and then what you get out of that is a quality of service. So you get frequency or headways, and you're doing all of that, and then the zone is the actual route. So in the case of the on-demand world, the zone becomes sort of a two-dimensional shape instead of a linear path. The demand becomes, again, the ridership. The supply is the number of vehicles you have, but those vehicles are dynamic and can be dynamically routed. And then the quality of service is measured typically in terms of wait times, which is not far off from the way you would think about frequency or headways. And again, all of this is tied back to the goals of what you're trying to achieve. So thinking about, zone and how to design your zone, typically there are sort of two ways to think about it. Either you have a citywide zone or a really big zone across a broad swath of the transit network, or you might have a series of smaller zones. So in the case of Edmonton, there's a number of smaller zones that are for specific neighborhoods, and it's effectively acting as a first mile or first kilometer, last kilometer service, connecting those different neighborhoods with terminal locations. Thinking about other aspects related to the zone, a narrower zone tends to be more efficient than sort of a broad square or circular zone. That's sort of that principle of linearity. So, if you have a really narrow zone, then, a vehicle doesn't need to deviate that much, and that can lead to better efficiencies. The other aspect in the zone is road speed has a huge impact on how the service performs. So, if you have a small zone, but it's a heavily congested area, that can have just as much impact as a large zone with, road speeds that are particularly efficient. Pretty intuitive stuff. In terms of demand, so what we would do as part of a service design process is, start with the zone. Here's where we want to offer the service. Then we say, okay, what's the demand? And the demand could be based on what the existing fixed route services in that area are. So, if you've got existing fixed route services and you're looking to replace them with on-demand, that might be a good way to look at it. There's also sort of capture rates that you can do based on population and jobs. There's a number of different ways you can estimate it. It's no different than trying to estimate that in the fixed route world. But then the other aspect of it is the pattern. So what is that demand going to look like? Is it sort of purely random to random throughout the zone? In the case of Edmonton, there's a lot of demand in these neighborhoods, and they're all generally connecting to a terminal location. So that pattern is more precise than say a purely random to random within a zone kind of pattern. And as part of the service design process, it's no different than any sort of modeling exercise where you're sort of gut checking all along the way and making sure that it kind of makes sense. And then on the supply side, at its simplest, that's the number of vehicles you have to serve the demand or serve the network that you want to serve with on demand. But the other aspect of it is the vehicle type. So on demand can work with anything from sedans and vans on the sort of lower or lower capacity end, all the way up to full size 40-foot buses. But depending on what your goals are and what the use case is, you want to make sure that the vehicle type is fit for purpose. There are challenges with full-size buses in the sense that they can't go down every street. And the reality is you're probably not filling those full-size buses. Meanwhile, with sedans and vans, they may not have sufficient capacity for busier periods of the day. So, in the case of Edmonton, it made a lot of sense to go with sort of a mid-size vehicle, vehicles. I think James will talk more about this. I can't remember if they're 15 or 21 passengers, but point being, there are sufficient capacity for busier times, and they're right-sized based on the use case. And the other aspect of that is also the configuration on board. So, vehicles being used at Edmonton have 2 spots for non-ambulatory wheelchair customers. That's an important consideration as well. So if you're planning on co-mingling conventional and paratransit riders, you want to make sure that you have enough capacity for non-ambulatory customers if you're carrying a high number of that type of rider. So again, you're sort of balancing these three dynamics and weighing the pros and cons and the trade-offs of all of them. And then with VIA, what we then do is we take the demand, the supply, and sort of the quality of service based on the goals, and we put it into our micro simulation tool. And we go through an iterative simulation process to really test what those different scenarios are going to look like out on the network. And so, the key inputs to the model are on the left in this slide, and then some of the key performance metrics and parameters are on the right. So what you can see, just to talk a bit about the key inputs to the model. So, one, is it going to be well, and this is somewhat our parlance, but a totally on-demand service where all the bookings happen in real time or near real time, sort of up to an hour in advance? Or are we going to allow rides to be booked, a day or 2 weeks or 3 weeks in advance? There are trade-offs to both, and I could probably spend an hour talking about the trade-offs between on-demand and pre-booking, but suffice to say that when you enable pre-booking, and that's more of sort of a traditional, say, paratransit service, when you do that, you're creating more restrictions in the system, and what that can lead to is a higher number of ride requests going unfilled. So depending on the use case and the goals, on-demand can often be better in certain use cases, and say pre-booking may be the better alternative in other use cases, for example, like paratransit, where you really have to guarantee arrival times and that type of thing. Some other aspects here, we talked about vehicle supplies, service hours. Is this going to be primarily a peak service, an all-day service? In terms of walking distances, there are different levels of service that agencies can provide. In the case of VIA, we have virtual bus stops. So we can overlay a network of virtual bus stops. They don't necessarily have physical markers on street. The alternative is to sort of restrict the system to physical bus stop locations, and that's totally fine too. And certainly in the case of Canada, due to winter maintenance and accessibility legislation, that's often preferred. And then on the algorithm side, the things to think about are how long of a wait time is going to be palatable and reasonable. In the case of first kilometer, last kilometer services, and particularly like ones that are connecting with, say, commuter rail or that type of thing, a lower wait time is typically desirable. In the case of optimizing fixed route services on evenings and weekends, a wait time of 15 to 20 minutes might be perfectly reasonable as well. We also need to set a maximum wait time. So this is, an example. It could be 30 minutes, it could be 20 minutes, it could be 40 minutes. We set a maximum walking distance, and we set a maximum detour time. So detour time is the amount of ability of the vehicle to detour a customer out of his or her general path of where they want to go. So there's a lot there, but really, the principles here are, there are some inputs that go into the model, and those inputs are characteristics around supply and demand. And then there are some outputs that come out of the model, and those outputs give us a picture of what a service will perform like out on the network. And really what we're looking for here is what constitutes a good service, or a service that's going to work. And that's really what we're trying to get out of this. We're not looking to get caught up in the actual details as much, because it is a model at the end of the day. So the point is to give us a picture of, is this going to work, and is this going to be a good service? And really, there are two key things that we're trying to understand. One is all or nearly all of the demand going to be met? So we don't want a situation where riders are being left behind. So the model is really, really good at answering that question. So, are we exceeding 95% of demand met? And the other aspect is, our wait times within the target of what you want to achieve. So our wait times in the sort of 8 to 10 minute range, if that's the target, or wait times in the 15 to 20 minute range, if that's the target. And what you can see in this table is, this is an example of an output from one of our modeling exercises. If you can see, as you reduce vehicles, utilization goes up, but then average wait time goes up as well. And so there's a relationship between supply, demand, and quality of service. And this is sort of what we're trying to get out of the model. I know we're sort of, I'm close to being done my piece, so I'm going to move through this relatively quickly. Just a few comments on things that we've noticed worldwide as a result of COVID. So smaller service zones, your typical sort of first mile, last mile services are seeing lower ridership. Services where there are single use cases where there isn't a lot of flexibility for customers to do all sorts of different trips are also seeing lower ridership. And it's important to sort of keep these designs as straightforward as possible to try and drive as much ridership as possible. So just to sort of move through these relatively quickly, in Columbus, Ohio, as a result of COVID, they really expanded their on-demand transit to a variety of new places, and this was to provide additional options to customers in areas that were sort of losing service or facing reduced services on the fixed route network as a result of COVID. This is an example from Miami where they started off with a zone that was smaller. They rapidly expanded it to encompass a variety of new areas without adding any additional vehicles. So they expanded the service zone to 3 times the size, and as a result, they got 3 times the ridership. You can see that here, but with the same number of vehicles out on the network, and that was to really sort of drive ridership higher. And then this principle of sort of keeping it simple, this was a very elaborate service design that we had in Wales. When we moved to a simpler service design, that drove ridership higher as well. And then maybe just a final comment about, you don't necessarily have to have it perfect at launch. There's a lot of things that can and do and need to be done after launch. So continuous marketing to increase demand and adjustments to increase demand over time. We are regularly adjusting the algorithm parameters for our services to simultaneously absorb more demand without the need for more vehicles, and also making sure that the system is performing to its optimal conditions. Looking to expand and adjust zone boundaries to drive more ridership and drive new use cases, and then also adjusting service hours as needed. And that can be increasing service hours. It can also be decreasing service hours. So, potentially on evenings and weekends, it may make sense to provide an additional hour of fixed route service and shift sort of the amount of hours of on-demand service depending on how things are performing. So that's it for me. Thank you so much for listening. There was a lot there. I look forward to your questions at the end. But without further ado, I will pass it along to I think Sarah is next, and appreciate the time today.
Great. I will get my slides up. A moment. Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sarah Feldman. I'm the Director of Planning and Scheduling with Edmonton Transit. My piece, I'm going to talk a bit about our communications and marketing campaign for our launch. I'm just getting my slides working. So as was discussed a lot in the first webinar, we launched on April 25th, so just last week, our new bus network, as well as the on-demand transit service. We redesigned all of our entire bus network for the city, really from a blank slate, and we launched a very large-scale on-demand service. These initiatives are really important piece of ETS are modernizing our transit system and keeping the city better connected, and also provides us a foundation for thoughtfully expanding transit service in the future as our city population grows towards a population of 2 million, which is in our city plan. So our new bus network was initially an important piece of our ridership growth strategy, but now in the post-pandemic world, it's really a critical piece of our ridership recovery. And we knew this would be a significant change for transit riders. So a really important piece was just building awareness that the change was coming and an education campaign to prepare customers for the change. Our main objectives were really to ensure customers were prepared to use the new bus routes as well as the on-demand service, to build confidence that we are delivering improved transit service with these changes, but also to empathize with our customers. We know that some perceived or may be negatively impacted by the change. It was never meant to be, it was not a growth project. We didn't have a budget to grow service. And so really there was a trade-off that involved people having longer walking distances or their service changing. And so we wanted to be very empathetic to customers whose service was changing. And then there's a really important piece, of course, internal communication, ensuring all of our staff and most importantly, our operators were informed and comfortable with the change and ready to act as ambassadors. So to achieve these objectives, we had a very thoughtful, integrated approach to our campaign. We leveraged expertise across all of our communications and engagement departments, and I can't take much credit for that. Our communications manager did a lot of that work, bringing together all the different parts, including external relations, our creative services, 311, our web and digital team, and our integrated marketing communications teams. And they worked very closely with Edmonton Transit to build and deploy their project. So I want to talk a bit about just broadly the communication plan, then I'm going to talk specifically about on-demand. Of course, due to the pandemic, we originally planned to do a lot of in-person outreach, going to festivals and major events and going out to all of our transit stations. But we recognized when we decided to postpone to April, and we were still in the midst of a pandemic, that we needed to shift and pivot and do things a bit differently. So we shifted from less in-person communication more to a digital marketing and social media campaign, and with a lot of virtual presentations. So we wanted to be as accessible as possible given current restrictions. We did, however, do a limited bit of face-to-face outreach during our launch week. So from the launch day for the first week, we had staff at all our major transit centers and stations handing out information and helping customers with their wayfinding. But mainly we were focused on this digital side, but it was a very robust campaign. We used a lot of tactics, which was really important to the scale of the change. We knew we needed different approaches for different audiences. We have a large diverse city with different ways people communicate and find the information. So we wanted to make the information accessible through as many channels as possible. So here's just on the slideshow a list of some of the different tactics we used. An important part of our creative behind the campaign, the design of the campaign, was around building awareness, that on-demand transit is coming, educating customers how on-demand transit will work, and then a call to action. That was towards the end when we got closer to launch, was telling people, download the app, create your account, educating people on the 3 ways they can book. But we had diverse tactics across all the channels we have available to us, including physical advertising, a robust website, videos, virtual presentations, and a lot of that ended up in earning us some earned media in the last few weeks before and during the launch. And you can see one example here where we're on the cover of Edmonton Journal, I think 3 times. This one was about the launch, saying the city prepares to launch the largest on-demand public transit service in Canada. So I wanted, before I talk about a little bit more about the marketing communications campaign, I'll talk about a few service-related decisions that also influenced our communication and marketing plan. One early decision we made was around booking channels. So we knew that we could have used just an app and web-based channels only and really focus people on using technology. However, actually, this decision was made quite early when we were in the RFP and negotiation phase, that we needed a phone booking option as well. And this was, I think, important in our context because of the scale of our deployment being a very large on-demand deployment, but also because we were not just introducing on-demand to new neighborhoods that never had transit before. We did have several neighborhoods that didn't have transit, but we were also in a number of neighborhoods replacing fixed route service with on-demand. And so customers were used to not having to do much pre-planning. Once they knew their schedule for their fixed route service, they just go out to the bus stop. And in those neighborhoods, many of those existing neighborhoods, we have a large seniors population. And we heard very loud and clear from some seniors during our planning that the technology could be challenging and that a phone booking option was really important. So this slide just shows the app, which Hamish showed a little bit before, as well as the web portal. And then, of course, we have the call center through PWT. Another important decision we needed to make farther in advance of launch was how we're going to communicate our pickup drop-off locations. Our original plan was actually to have all the locations unmarked and have true virtual stops. And that would allow us a lot of flexibility to move stops and make the service as dynamic as possible. However, as I mentioned, we were replacing conventional routes with on-demand service in many neighborhoods. And even in the newer neighborhoods, we had permanent bus stops already built by developers. And so we had concrete pads and bus stop poles already installed. And so it was really kind of a straightforward decision in some ways to decide to sign all of the on-demand stops. This helped to communicate the change, of course, something physical in neighborhoods that the customers could see. But it also allowed us a way to communicate the booking channels. So all the bus stop signs have the 3 booking channels. And the signs also show the destinations where the service is going. So in the neighborhoods, it shows the hubs that are the destinations. And at the hubs, the stop shows which neighborhoods that stop serves. Here in the picture on the right, you can actually see an example in a neighborhood that had current bus routes where the bus stop was closing. So on the left was the old bus stop sign with a big red sticker on top saying that the stop was closing. And then parallel to that is the new on-demand transit sign. And then on the new on-demand sides, they had this yellow piece, a yellow sticker that will be peeled off post-launch. And that just really draws attention to that service is activated on April 25th. So to promote the service, we needed to create lots of deliverables, including some I've already shared. And they also included the bus wraps, as well as our digital and print advertising and the look of the app. In the City of Edmonton, we have a strong brand for the City of Edmonton, as well as for ETS. And so there was not really possibility to create a new brand for our on-demand service. So unlike some properties that have created a unique name and brand for their on-demand, we really needed to create a look and feel that fit in with our City of Edmonton brand. So we ended up using the City of Edmonton logo quite extensively across all of our creative, including and using the blue color of ETS in the City of Edmonton. But we wanted to help this stand out and not just blend in. So we did integrate this yellow look with stripes and yellow wording across the bus wraps as well as in the app. And that just trying to help them stand out from the rest of our ETS fleet. We opted for a very simple and straightforward name for the service. We call it Edmonton On-Demand Transit. While we could have come up with a more creative name that would have been catchy, we decided we wanted to keep it easily recognizable, not have a distinct name, and have customers just know what we're talking about when we refer to the service. And that really fits in with our how we're describing the service, which is that it's just one more layer in our integrated transit service. So it's not a unique standalone service, it's part of our overall integrated transit network. The first phase of our communication plan, we needed to have a lot of digital tools. This was important. We wanted to get the information out early while we were developing all of our print materials. So this started, one of the first things was our detailed web page that had an interactive Google map that showed all the on-demand service areas and the pickup and drop-off spots. So you can see that a segment of that map is shown here. And then we had a lookup tool where you could look up a neighborhood and then it would tell you what the destination hub would be. So that was really helpful to communicate which neighborhoods were part of the scope of the service. As we got closer to launch, we had more materials becoming available online. This included an on-demand transit guide, which is really just a small booklet that we said contains everything you need to know about using on-demand. So something that customers could download. We also printed them and have been distributing them, but distribution channels are more limited due to COVID. So the downloadable version was really important. We also produced 2 videos. The first was created by the City of Edmonton and was more of a promotional video, announcing the service and describing at a very high level how it works. And then the second video was produced by PWT, and that was a how-to video showing customers how to book trips using the app. Of course, an important piece on our website, as well as in the on-demand guide, was a map of all the on-demand areas. And with such a big launch, this was a complex piece to put together. We're having many service areas. But we wanted one map that showed all the on-demand neighborhoods and their destination hubs. And so this is what it looks like in the guide. We also integrated this in our overall system map, our big day map of all our service, showing the on-demand zones to communicate that as well. So as I mentioned, online was a really important piece of as we pivoted our campaign. So we had a comprehensive digital advertising strategy and a social media strategy. This involved a paid campaign for digital advertising across multiple channels, so people would see them as pop-up ads in different areas, as well as a calendar of social media posts that started in March and just continued through launch, with the message changing as we went through different phases. As we started our social media campaign, we immediately started hearing from customers who were confused or frustrated, mainly with the changes to the regular bus routes. And so a big part of our work in March and April was around directly responding to customers on social media. We would correct misinformation and we provide them with custom trip plans. So overall, we did that for about 350 customers on social media in March and April. And then, of course, we had a large paid campaign. And one thing we did closer to launch as well is we did a Facebook live stream, sort of a Q&A session where we took in questions live from customers and answered them as they came in. So in addition to all the broader digital advertising, social media, we really need to focus. We also had physical ads throughout the system on our buses and our stations, but those were mainly around the broader message around everything's changing April 25th. But for on-demand, we really wanted to promote this geographically within the neighborhoods getting on-demand service. So we did some targeted advertising for those neighborhoods. This included 2 rounds of direct mail where we sent postcards to all the households in the neighborhoods. And then in the industrial business areas that are served by on-demand, we sent a letter to all the businesses describing the service. So the first mailer went out in March, and it was just generally raising awareness that on-demand is coming and communicating the booking channels. And then the second round was in April, 2 weeks before launch. We sent a second postcard that was geographically targeted. It gave specifics for that neighborhood, showing a map of the on-demand service area and the pickup stops and the drop-off locations. Also, before launch, we had road signs near the entrances of all the on-demand communities, letting them know that on-demand is coming, and they listed specifically on-demand is coming to neighborhood X, so people knew it was specific for their neighborhood. And then almost done. My last piece I wanted to mention was the importance of trip planning. A lot of our campaign and the timing of our campaign was timed around when we could make trip planning available on the regular bus routes. So we, through the GTFS feed for trip planners, we're able to make the new bus route schedules available 45 days before April 25th. And every day we got closer to April 25th added a day on, so April 26th, et cetera. And this was a constraint around the GTFS feed and when Google Maps would show the data. But as many of you might know, if you've been interested in on-demand, conventional trip planners can't yet display on-demand service. It's something the industry is working on, and conventional trip planners like Google Maps and others don't yet display on-demand trips. But we were really pleased for on-demand working with PWT and VIA that they had a solution for integrating on-demand into transit app. And so this, you can see on the right here, this is just a screenshot from Transit app showing an integrated trip plan where a customer is going from one area and needs to take a regular bus route, and then they have an option to transfer to on-demand to get to their destination. So it's circled in right. So here it shows 3 trip plans, the first 2 just using a bus route, and of course a long walk because there's no service at the end point. And then the third option showing the on-demand leg of the journey. And so this was really important. Of course, we encourage our customers to use the trip planning tools, and we wanted to make sure that we had some way to communicate the on-demand service there as well. And my last piece, I just want to mention a really important piece of all of our campaign was gender-based analysis plus considerations for how we communicate out to diverse populations. Many of our tactics for this covered both the new bus network and the on-demand service. They weren't specific to on-demand, but it was really critical for us to reach out to diverse stakeholder groups, such as seniors, newcomers, people with disabilities, low-income Edmontonians. So far we've provided presentations to over 40 community groups, as well as a number of boards and agencies. Boards and agencies include things like our city's Accessibility Advisory Committee and our Transit Advisory Board. We also did presentations to groups serving particular populations, such as our Seniors Coordinating Council, and many presentations with the populations themselves receiving service. So presentations directly to seniors' residences that are receiving on-demand service, directly with newcomer groups and people with disabilities. We also provided content to community newsletters, and we translated print ads. Here you can see some translation into Punjabi and Vietnamese. So we wanted to also make our advertising available more at that grassroots level to various community newsletters and community communication channels. So with that, that's the quick overview of our broad communication plan, and I'll hand it over to James. And I just need to figure out how to stop sharing. Great, yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. Just bring up my slides here. All right, so as it relates to vehicle right sizing, Hamish mentioned that the process that goes into determining the number of vehicles required, and if that provides certain outputs like passengers per vehicle hour and that type of thing. Just a couple of critical things as it relates to vehicles here is, data from the service modeling will obviously be your guide in determining the right type of vehicles, but passengers per vehicle hour, although a critical metric, is not the be all end all. Before pulling the trigger on a vehicle purchase, agencies or companies should consider future growth and service adjustments. Just a couple notes on that. So in the city of Edmonton, there are a couple of areas where student ridership has been flagged as a potential concern, and the impact that a lot of demand would have on the system at one time in areas where a number of students from a neighborhood need to get to a certain area. So we've contemplated, it hasn't been put into effect yet, but we've contemplated the idea of perhaps introducing some form of fixed trips that have some degree of demand-based response, but would leave neighborhoods at a certain time to cater to certain ridership. So in order to do that, and have that be effective in removing some of that demand from the other portions of the network, you'd need to have vehicles of a certain capacity, perhaps slightly larger than what you'd need on an ongoing basis throughout the day. And one of the reasons that it may be good to look at vehicles that are perhaps slightly larger that provide you that extra capacity is that there's diminishing returns for cost of ownership as vehicles get smaller. So we've found in our analysis that there's a considerable cost savings in moving from a 40-foot transit bus to one of the buses that you see in the picture here. But moving from a vehicle that, say, seats 14 people to 8 people or 10 people, you really don't generate considerable savings at that point in time. There's some very minor fuel savings, but capital expense is negligible. And the biggest expense, of course, of operating a vehicle is driver labor costs, which remain unchanged if you go to an even smaller model based on license class and things like that. The vehicles that you see here in the picture only require a Class 4 license in Alberta, which is the same as driving a taxi. Some other key considerations with regard to specifications, your ambulatory versus accessible seating mix, how many seats you lose if you have a wheelchair on board, and what impacts that might have for service, whether you want ramp or lift access. Lift equipped vehicles are obviously much cheaper than the low floor ramp equipped vehicles. And, in our experience, especially in areas where you're introducing on-demand for the first time, you're going to have very minimal use, of those accessible features. Accessibility standardization is also another factor. If you go with vehicles that are too small, small vans, for example, then you may have issues where, although you can perhaps get wheelchairs on board, the size of mobility devices that you can transport is inconsistent with your fixed route services. And then the other thing you'll want to consider is safety and security features. I'm going to get into that in just a second here. So one thing we've found that agencies really need to pay attention to is the implications of the lower vehicle weight for operating these smaller vehicles on first last kilometer basis. So there are different rules and regulations that apply for vehicles with this GVW. So you'd be in or unable to transport parents with strollers in the fashion that you see in that conventional transit bus picture there, which creates some complications. So as Hamish mentioned earlier, we've outfitted our vehicles with certain features, and one of them is the integrated child seats that you can see there. In the absence of this type of equipment, you'd be forcing parents to bring bulky equipment with them every time they use the vehicle. And we've run into the situation in some of our other deployments where our managers have been running to and from Walmart and clearing them out of all of their booster seats and that kind of stuff so that we can offer this kind of equipment on board. But if you know in advance of this requirement, you can get it integrated into the vehicle. As far as operational considerations, there's certain things that are different, obviously, about operating on demand, and I just wanted to highlight a couple of those. So in terms of policies and rules, there's some different things here that you'll need to consider. Obviously, when you're operating a fixed route transit network or LRT service, et cetera, customers can show up and the vehicle operates at a fixed schedule, and it matters not whether they take, one at 8 o'clock or 8:05, et cetera. But in on-demand, where they're basically reserving that vehicle based on, a trip request, late cancellations or no-shows become problematic. It's just basically a waste of resources to send a vehicle somewhere based on demand and have that person not ultimately take their trip. So late cancellations and no-shows will both need to be defined, and you'll also need to determine the response to those. That can include if you take payment through the app, someone would still pay for a trip that they late cancel or no show for, or the only other alternative would be account review, where you can suspend someone's account or give them warnings if there's a number of no shows or cancellations. Some fare policies will need to be considered, whether fare on this service will be more or less or the same, and also how. I mentioned that in-app payment is possible. You can also just take regular onboard payment as well. Privacy policies is a big one. These are required for the mobile app to reach stores. This is one that was definitely an eye-opener for us in this process, and one that, despite us initiating it fairly early on, still became a bit of a time crunch at the end. So, there's definitely some privacy implications of taking people's data when they use this service that we don't have if they're using a fixed route service. Service start and end definition. So unlike a regular service that's posted and it ends at such and such a time, there are some complications with when service ends. Our service in Edmonton, for example, ends at 10 p.m. Does that mean someone can get picked up anytime before 10 p.m. or does it mean that their trip needs to completely finish before 10 p.m.? Those are the kind of things that need to be navigated as well. They're a little different. And then pre-booking options, if any. So, pre-booking obviously has implications on service efficiency because you're allowing people to pre-reserve vehicles, which requires them to be in certain areas that perhaps makes it more difficult for other users to use that same vehicle on the service day. The next thing I want to talk about here, this is the last thing, in fact, is staff and system oversight. So we have a lot of clients that ask us this question. You know, what does it mean for you know, the management, the oversight, the dispatch staff, et cetera, that are required to oversee the service? And what we've found is that road supervision in these kind of services becomes less important, while data analysis and dispatch becomes much more important. The drivers are, you know, directed throughout the day via tablet instructions, which obviously helps in providing them that direction, and for us to analyze if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing without necessarily being on the road and overseeing that. And there's, you know, a considerable amount of rider feedback and other metrics that assist in employee management. So this is the type of hub that our employees have access to, that shows them everything that's going on in the system. This was taken from last night when we had 22 vehicles on the road in Edmonton. So it's these type of tools that allow us to operate a little bit more lean than fixed route, perhaps. And that's illustrated here. So for the Edmonton On-Demand service, we're operating at a rate of approximately 24,000 service hours per admin employee. So anybody non-frontline. 16.5 if you include the dedicated call center employees. The call centers are not necessarily required if you choose not to have dial-in options available for customers. Based on those numbers, we're utilizing 20 to 30% fewer admin, management, supervisory employees than similar sized fixed route services. And the savings over similar sized para are even more dramatic, because there's that do-it-yourself element of the service that doesn't require people to contact us every time they want to trip. Another thing I'll mention here is that you know, this relates to the you know, rider experience reporting that we get. So this is taken from the first several days of service in Edmonton. You can see that we've got a 4.8 average rating out of 5 stars. And this can be filtered at the driver level. So you can actually create report cards for drivers that include their 5-star rating. Many of our drivers in Edmonton are familiar with this type of feedback mechanism from driving for Uber and that type of thing. And it is really helpful in creating that kind of friendly competition and pride amongst the driving group. And we're even considering using some of this data to inform you know, merit-based pay increases and other things like that. And you know, one final thing I'll say is that you know, in addition to riders or drivers getting that immediate feedback on every trip on how things are going, one of the great things it does is it allows us to provide that positive reinforcement to drivers. As everyone can appreciate, most of the time we only hear about the negative as we deliver our services. So this is really encouraging that, you know, positive feedback, and allows us to recognize and reward employees, whereas you know, otherwise they may only hear from us if there's complaints and so on and so forth. So that's a quick discussion on some of those items there. So with that, I guess we'll have at least a couple minutes for questions.
Yeah, thanks very much, James. We do have a couple questions already coming in, so we'll have everybody kind of come back online here, and we'll get everybody up. All right, the first question here that we have is from David, and the question is this is for Hamish, part of your presentation. Does the map show on-demand zones dynamically? So, you know, if you're running peak service with fixed route and off-peak service with on-demand, does the map show the service zones dynamically, so that it would show it only when it's open?
I can't speak for other vendors. With us, it does. So, it's not just based on time, but it's also based on rules. So, for example, in Edmonton, if you drop yourself in a zone as your origin, all of the other zones fall away, and the only destination zone based on the rules set in Edmonton is the terminal location, or that zone in particular. So a customer knows that they cannot travel from one on-demand zone to another on-demand zone, because that's the rules that have been set in Edmonton in terms of how the service is designed. And with our technology, there's no user error possible. because the other zones fall away, and that's possible based on time as well. You know, depending on how you want to configure it, that's all of that is possible with our technology.
Excellent. The next question is around the call center. So James, maybe you want to take this. Can you elaborate on the dial-in function and how that works? Is it an automated system?
Sure. So at all hours of service, plus I think 30 minutes before service starts for the day, we have the call center staffed so that ideally people will, when dialing in, get to talk to a representative. If you know the representatives are all busy with other callers, then there are some automated messages, but by and large, people just simply wait on hold to get their trip booked with an agent. Outside of service hours, there are messages that inform people of when the call center is open and what other options they may have to book if they so choose, including encouraging downloading and using the app, because over time, you know, we're hoping to drive as much traffic to the app for two reasons. One is to limit the call center traffic, and two is because you know the app really does provide the best user experience in terms of being able to book, adjust, you know, track rides, etc.
Good, thank you. We have another question around the school youth trips in peak times and on-demand zones, and we're not having as much of an issue with this right now just due to COVID, but there are some things that we can put in place around rules and policies on how to do the pickups and drop-offs and around the service zones, specifically pickup points, which can be managed based on time of day and a variety of other things. So that's a pretty complex question. And Ravin, maybe what we should do is take that offline to kind of find out exactly what you're looking for, and we could really dive into that. But that's a very, very complex question. So just those few points might suffice, but if not, please feel free to reach out and we can chat about that further. We've gone past time. I want to thank everybody, and if we get another question here, I think that's it right now. So if we want to, I want to thank our panelists. Thanks very much. Great information today. Very, very thorough, really good. So I hope everybody has enjoyed the webinar. This is session 2 of 3, as I mentioned. And session 3 will be coming up in roughly about a month's time. And we look forward to seeing you back at that time. So James, Hamish, Sarah, thanks very much. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Dan. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.